You know that unsettling feeling when someone smiles at you in public, but their eyes reveal nothing but disdain? When their words sound caring to everyone around, but you can hear the malice hidden beneath them. I lived with that feeling every single day for 3 years. My name is Elellanar Whitmore, and at 72 years old, I thought I understood betrayal. I was wrong. The worst wounds don't come from strangers or business enemies trying to tear you down. They come from the people closest to you, the ones who sit at your table, call you family, and yet secretly plot your downfall when the doors close behind them. Before we dive back in, let us know where you're tuning in from. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button because tomorrow, I've got something even more special lined up just for you. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon 3 years ago when my world began to unravel, though at the time, I had no idea. I was in my garden, tending to the roses that Thomas, my late husband, had lovingly planted for our 40th wedding anniversary. The sunlight kissed my weathered hands as I carefully pruned each stem, a task that always felt meditative. Thomas used to tell me that roses needed firm guidance to thrive, a sentiment that spoke to much more than just gardening. As I looked at those blooms, I realized they symbolized all the lessons he'd instilled in me: patience, resilience, and a firm hand in the face of adversity. The sound of gravel crunching beneath tires snapped me from my thoughts. I turned to see Sarah, my daughter, stepping out of the car, her chestnut hair catching the warm October sun. Even at 45, she moved with a youthful energy, practically bouncing on her toes with excitement. Behind her was Marcus, her husband, tall, polished, and wearing the same practiced smile that he always seemed to have, no matter the occasion. I had been living alone in the Whitmore estate for 2 years after Thomas's passing. The house, a mansion built by Thomas's hard work, was a testament to a life of ambition. It felt far too big for me now, the walls heavy with memories of laughter and love that no longer filled the rooms. When Sarah suggested I move in with them, it seemed like the logical step, and I agreed. She promised that I would be happy, that this would be a fresh start for me. "Mother, you should see the plans Marcus has for the East Wing," Sarah called out to me as she linked arms with her husband, her voice full of excitement. Her gaze was warm, glowing with the same affection she'd had for Marcus since their wedding. They had been married just over a year, and Sarah still looked at him as though he had hung the moon and painted the stars. Marcus stepped forward, his tall frame straightening with the confidence that had earned him a place in the world of high-end real estate. His handshake was firm, his eye contact intense. "Mrs. Whitmore, I want you to know how grateful Sarah and I are that you're willing to share your beautiful home with us," he said, his voice smooth and authoritative. "We promise we'll take excellent care of it. And of you." His words should have warmed my heart. Any mother would want to hear such words from her son-in-law, but I couldn't shake the unsettling feeling creeping up inside me. There was something in the way he emphasized certain words, the way his gaze lingered over the house as though he was already calculating its value. Still, I pushed the unease aside. Sarah was happy, and that was all that mattered to me at the time. The first few months of living together went smoothly. The house, once cold with silence, was filled with Sarah's laughter again. She spent hours cooking, recreating Thomas's favorite dishes, and the air in the kitchen was alive with the sounds of family. Marcus seemed respectful and attentive, always asking about my day and making sure I felt included. At dinner parties, he would introduce me as the remarkable Elellanar Whitmore, the woman who helped build this incredible legacy, as if the words themselves could bring me some form of validation. But over time, things began to shift. Slowly at first, so subtly that I questioned my own perceptions. Marcus would suggest that some rooms in the house were too much for me to maintain, that perhaps I should move my activities to the smaller guest wing. It seemed so considerate, so concerned. "The main staircase might be a bit of a challenge," he'd say, always with Sarah present. "And your suite upstairs might not be the safest option. We just want you to be comfortable." When I protested, saying that I had been managing just fine on those stairs for over 30 years, Marcus would give me that patient smile, the one that made me feel foolish for even questioning him. He would talk about elderly falls and how much he and Sarah worried about me. Eventually, it felt like giving in to their concerns wasn't just easier, it was expected. So, I moved to the guest wing, a small concession in the name of family harmony. That was just the beginning. At first, the changes felt like mere gestures of care. Marcus's suggestions about managing the property more efficiently seemed harmless, even beneficial. After all, I was no longer as young as I once was, and the house was sprawling. But something about his approach began to raise alarms I couldn't fully articulate. It started with small things. The household staff, once my trusted companions, were now being instructed to report directly to Marcus. "You don't need to worry about coordinating with the gardeners or cleaning crew anymore, Elellanar," Marcus said one evening over dinner. "Let me handle the tedious details so you can relax and enjoy your retirement." It seemed like a kind gesture. Who wouldn't want to make their elderly loved one's life easier? But the more he took over, the less room I seemed to have for my own autonomy. Margaret, our housekeeper of 15 years, approached me privately one day, her face etched with concern. "Mrs. Whitmore, I don't mean to speak out of turn, but Mr. Marcus has been asking a lot of questions about your schedule and personal habits. When you sleep, when you go for walks, who visits you?" She hesitated, glancing around nervously before continuing. "It just doesn't sit right with me." I assured her that Marcus was only being thorough in his new role, but the unease in her voice lingered. The isolation, I began to realize, wasn't happening overnight. It was creeping in, slow and steady. Friends who once visited regularly started calling less often. I mentioned this to Marcus, who offered the explanation that he had been screening calls to protect me from scammers. "Widows are prime targets for fraud," he said with a heavy sigh. "I've already blocked dozens of suspicious numbers." But I hadn't asked him to screen my calls. And when my weekly bridge game with the ladies from the country club stopped happening, I questioned Sarah. "I thought we were going to play this week," I said, trying to mask the hurt in my voice. "Oh," Sarah replied, looking genuinely surprised. "Marcus said you mentioned it was too tiring for you lately and that you wanted to take a break." I protested that I hadn't said anything of the sort, but Marcus smoothly interjected, explaining how tired I had looked after the last game. His voice was always so reasonable, so calm, that it made me question my own recollections. It wasn't just the external isolation, it was the internal one too. The way Marcus began speaking to me when we were alone was different from the public persona he so carefully maintained. His tone grew clipped and dismissive, and any questions I asked about household matters seemed to irritate him. When I mentioned wanting to review the monthly expenses as I always had, he sighed, a little too dramatically. "You don't need to worry about that, Elellanar. Sarah and I have everything under control." He looked at me as though I were a child, unable to comprehend something as simple as family finances. The patronizing comments began to pile up. He'd tell me how difficult it must be to keep track of everything at my age. And when I persisted, asking about the accounts or challenging his decisions, he'd say, "Look, Elellanar, I know this is hard for you. I understand. Giving up control is difficult at any age, but you have to trust that Sarah and I have your best interests at heart." He spoke to me as if I were incapable of understanding my own life, as though my years of managing the estate with Thomas were nothing more than a distant memory. I should have seen the warning signs earlier. But at the time, I was so desperate to believe that everything was fine, that I didn't allow myself to question it. The moments when he would snap at me, the coldness he showed when Sarah wasn't around, those were the moments that should have set off alarms, but I ignored them. I didn't want to believe that my daughter's happiness was being built on a foundation of lies. Then, the changes became even more insidious. It wasn't enough for Marcus to control the staff and manage my schedule. Now, he was becoming increasingly involved in my personal life. He began taking an active role in the decisions surrounding the house, presenting himself as the responsible party who was just trying to help me. "You don't need to worry about these things anymore," he'd say, always with that soothing smile that belied the tension in his eyes. But it wasn't about helping me. It was about controlling everything around me. One evening, as we sat at the dinner table, Marcus casually mentioned, "I think it would be best if we moved you into the smaller guest wing. You'll be closer to the kitchen and more comfortable, and the stairs will be easier for you." When I protested, reminding him that I had lived in my suite for years and had never had a problem with the stairs. He gave me that look, the same one he gave when I questioned his decisions. "We just want you to be comfortable, Elellanar. We're only thinking of your well-being." The worst part was Sarah. She was right there, her hand in his, agreeing with him without a second thought. "Mother, we just want you to be happy," she said, squeezing my hand with a mixture of concern and pity. "You don't need to keep living like this. Marcus is just trying to make sure you're safe." They made it seem so reasonable, so kind. And so I moved to the guest wing, thinking that perhaps it wasn't such a big deal after all. But the more I allowed them to make these decisions for me, the more I began to feel like a guest in my own home. I was pushed into the smaller rooms, isolated from the life I had once led, and the space I had shared with Thomas was slowly but surely being taken over by Marcus and Sarah. As the weeks went by, I started to feel the walls closing in. What had begun as small suggestions, moving to the guest wing, letting Marcus manage the estate, grew into something more dangerous. Marcus was gradually stripping away the very essence of my independence, while presenting it all as acts of care and concern. I had grown so accustomed to his manipulative kindness that I didn't even see the full extent of it until it was nearly too late. The next phase of his plan came disguised as a household efficiency. Marcus suggested that since he was handling more of the property's day-to-day management, it would be easier if the household staff reported directly to him. The staff, he claimed, were more comfortable working with him now, and it would relieve me of unnecessary stress. At first, I didn't mind, thinking it might actually be a relief. But the more I reflected, the more I realized that I had just given up control of another aspect of my life. Margaret, my longtime housekeeper, was the first to voice her concerns. Her voice trembled when she confided in me one morning, telling me that Marcus had been asking questions that went beyond what was necessary. "I just don't think it's right, Mrs. Whitmore," Margaret said, her face etched with worry. "He asked about your daily routine, what time you wake up, when you walk around, who you see and when. It feels strange to me, like he's trying to take control of everything." I dismissed it, trying to reassure Margaret that Marcus was only being thorough in his new role. But deep down, I felt something shift, as if the foundation beneath me was slowly crumbling. The isolation grew more pronounced. Calls that used to come in regularly stopped. I'd pick up the phone only to hear a dial tone or a message saying the call had been screened for safety. It was always Marcus, explaining that he had blocked suspicious numbers. I no longer received calls from friends who used to check on me. I noticed that when I asked about my weekly bridge game, Sarah seemed confused, even though I hadn't cancelled it. "Marcus mentioned you were feeling tired and wanted to rest on those afternoons," she explained. I hadn't said any such thing. Each time Marcus would intervene on my behalf, the rationalizations seemed more plausible, but they weren't true. One day, he even mentioned that the house needed to be restructured for security purposes. "More locks, more monitoring. It's for your safety, Elellanar," he said, speaking with that same concerned tone that he had adopted so easily. "You can't expect to handle everything on your own anymore." It was then that I realized Marcus wasn't just taking over the house. He was taking over my life. One evening, as I sat in the formal living room, I overheard Marcus speaking to one of his colleagues on the phone in the study. His voice, usually so polished, was tinged with something darker: frustration, anxiety, even fear. He was discussing the estate and how much more it was worth than anyone had anticipated. "We need to move fast," I heard him say. "The creditors are getting impatient. If we can get her to move to Sunset Manor, then we can start liquidating the assets. I'll be able to take care of everything." The words caught in my throat. Sunset Manor? I knew the name. It was not a care facility, but a psychiatric hospital. Families used it to quietly manage elderly relatives they no longer wanted to deal with. If I went there, I would lose everything. My home, my life, and even my autonomy. The thought that Marcus might be planning to have me committed, under the guise of caring for me, sent a cold chill through my spine. I began to gather pieces of the puzzle. I started taking notes of Marcus's conversations, observing his actions when Sarah wasn't around. One evening, I saw him make a phone call with increasing desperation. "She's fighting me every step of the way," he said. "I need her to go willingly. If not, we might need to consider another option. If she's not willing to go to Sunset Manor, we'll make her." The implications of what he was saying were too much to ignore. The desperate tone in his voice made it clear. He was prepared to take things further if I resisted. He wasn't just after the estate, he was after my life. By then, I had pieced together the full extent of his plan. It was no longer just about isolating me from my family and friends, controlling my daily routine, or even taking over the estate. It was about removing me completely, ensuring that I was out of the picture so he could take full control of everything Thomas and I had worked for. One night, when I was alone in the guest wing, I made a decision. I would no longer be passive. I wasn't going to let him take everything without a fight. The first step was to understand the full scope of his manipulations. I began researching every financial detail of the estate, all the legal protections Thomas had put in place. What I found shocked me. Thomas, in his wisdom, had anticipated such a scenario. He had worked with our attorneys to create layers of legal protections, including a private trust that Marcus couldn't access, no matter what authority he might try to gain over my personal affairs. I wasn't as vulnerable as Marcus had thought. I wasn't the helpless widow he had assumed me to be. The next morning, while Marcus and Sarah were out, I ventured into Thomas's study and began reviewing the files that I hadn't touched since his death. I found a wealth of information, documents and legal instruments that made it clear I wasn't just another victim in his game. Thomas had been concerned about my future and had gone to great lengths to ensure I would be protected. I wasn't helpless. I was stronger than Marcus could ever have imagined. As I sat in Thomas's study, surrounded by the meticulous legal documents he had arranged for my protection, I felt a flicker of hope. This wasn't just about the estate, it was about protecting my autonomy, my legacy, and my right to live my life without fear. The layers of trust and legal barriers that Thomas had woven around me were stronger than I had realized, and Marcus had no idea that they even existed. It was the first true advantage I had in this battle. Marcus had assumed that I was merely a grieving widow, weak and susceptible. But I was Elellanar Whitmore, a woman who had spent her life building an empire alongside her husband, and I wasn't going down without a fight. In the days that followed, I kept up the facade of being the confused, compliant elderly woman he thought I was. Every time Marcus hovered, offering more help and concern, I let him believe that I was dependent on his guidance. But in truth, I was gathering information, watching him, waiting for the right moment to expose his manipulation. One afternoon, as I sat in the morning room, I overheard Marcus speaking to a man on the phone. His voice was urgent, and the conversation left me cold. "I can't wait much longer," he said, his tone clipped with anxiety. "If we don't get her committed soon, the creditors are going to start putting pressure on me. We need to move fast." It was clear that Marcus was on a tight deadline, likely the same deadline that he had set for me to leave for Sunset Manor. But I wasn't going to comply. Not now. Not ever. I immediately called Jonathan Hartwell, our longtime attorney. When the phone rang, my heart raced. I couldn't afford to make any mistakes. "Jonathan, it's time," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. "I need to activate Thomas's emergency protocol." There was a pause. Then Jonathan's voice responded with the crispness I had always relied on. "Understood. We'll take immediate action. We're already monitoring Marcus and his financial activities. You've made the right decision, Elellanar. We're going to shut him down." The relief that flooded me was immense, but I knew it was just the beginning. The plan had to unfold perfectly. There was no room for error. The days that followed felt like a delicate balancing act. I played the role of the confused, easily manipulated elderly woman while Jonathan's team moved into place. They were gathering evidence, setting up surveillance, and ensuring that Marcus's every move was being documented. My role was simple: stay in the background, act helpless, and wait for the right moment to strike. But Marcus, unaware of the net tightening around him, was growing increasingly impatient. I overheard more phone calls, and the desperation in his voice became more evident. "She's getting more difficult," he told a colleague one night. "Every time I try to push her towards Sunset Manor, she resists. It's like she knows what I'm trying to do." The more he tried to convince me to leave, the more determined I became to stay. The house, the legacy, and everything Thomas and I had worked for belonged to me, and I wasn't about to let a man like Marcus steal it from me. One evening, after Sarah and Marcus had gone out for dinner, I made my way into the study once again. I had a plan, a final step in my strategy to expose Marcus for the fraud he was. As I sifted through the papers in Thomas's desk, I found something that made my heart skip a beat. A financial overview of the estate, with a detailed analysis of its value, assets, and liabilities. There it was, in black and white. The estate was worth far more than Marcus had led us to believe, close to $30 million, not $12 million. Marcus had been underestimating everything. The value of the property, the power he thought he had over me, and most of all, the depths of the protection Thomas had built around our wealth. I wasn't just a widow waiting for her end. I was a woman with resources, connections, and the means to fight back. But I had to act quickly. The clock was ticking. That night, Jonathan and I had another conversation, one that would set the final wheels in motion. "Elellanar," Jonathan said, his voice calm but serious. "We're in position. We have all the evidence we need. It's time to act before Marcus makes any more moves." I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction as I realized how close I was to putting an end to this charade. The investigators had gathered irrefutable proof of Marcus's financial troubles, his fraudulent behavior, and his attempt to manipulate Sarah and me for his gain. The backup plan he had discussed on the phone, the one involving more direct options if the psychiatric commitment failed, had been recorded. We were ready. But first, I needed to keep Marcus in the dark for a little longer. The following morning, I put my plan into action. Sarah and Marcus were already making arrangements for my supposed care at Sunset Manor, but I wasn't going anywhere. I summoned them both to the living room for what I called an important family meeting. As they sat down, I looked them both in the eye, my resolve hardening. "I've changed my mind," I said, my voice steady and unwavering. "I'm not going to Sunset Manor. Not tomorrow, not ever. If you believe I need psychiatric care, you'll have to go through the proper legal channels and prove I'm incompetent." Marcus's face went pale. He had underestimated me for too long. What followed was a tense standoff. Marcus tried to brush off my words, but I could see the fear flicker in his eyes. His plan had just crumbled. Sarah, though, was shaken. "Mother, you can't just change your mind like this," she protested. "We've made arrangements. The doctors are expecting you." But I wasn't going anywhere. I won't be manipulated any longer. I'm not confused, I'm not delusional, and I'm not going quietly into any institution, I said, standing tall in front of them. Marcus tried to dismiss my words with a wave, but it was too late. The truth was finally starting to sink into Sarah's heart. "Mother, I want to talk to you about all of this," she said, her voice filled with concern. "I need to understand what's really going on." It was the moment I'd been waiting for, the beginning of Marcus's unraveling. The plan was in motion, and the final moves were about to begin. The game was nearly over, and I was no longer a helpless widow. I was the one in control, and Marcus was about to learn the hard way that you never underestimate a woman who has been underestimated her entire life. The tension in the house was palpable as the final steps of the plan unfolded. Marcus, unaware that his carefully crafted world was crumbling, tried desperately to maintain control. He had underestimated me for months, but now, as the truth came to light, he found himself in a game he couldn't win. Sarah had started to ask the right questions, and I could see the doubt forming in her mind. I had spent weeks playing my part, allowing Marcus to believe I was weak, easily manipulated, but now it was time for the truth to surface. The emotional manipulation had worked for so long because Marcus believed that he was the puppet master, pulling the strings of our family. But he didn't understand the true strength that lay beneath my calm exterior. As the evening settled in, the federal agents were ready. They had been quietly watching Marcus's every move, gathering evidence that would ensure his arrest. The wheels of justice were in motion, but everything hinged on one crucial moment, when Marcus would finally reveal his true intentions. That night, I summoned Sarah to my study. It was time to finally confront the man who had been pulling the strings, the man who had almost destroyed our family for his own gain. "Sarah, you need to understand something important," I began, my voice steady, unwavering. "I'm not the confused, helpless woman Marcus has made me out to be. He has been manipulating you, using you against me, and he has been systematically isolating me to take control of everything I have." Her face was filled with confusion, but she was listening now, truly listening. The lies that had been woven around her were starting to unravel, and she was beginning to see the truth for the first time. "What do you mean? How could he do this?" she whispered. I sat down across from her, taking her hands in mine. "I don't expect you to understand all of it right now, but Marcus has been working with outside forces, criminals, to get access to our estate. He has been manipulating everyone, including you, to make me look insane. He's tried to isolate me, control my finances, and if his plan had succeeded, he would have had me committed to a psychiatric facility, all while stealing everything your father and I built." The words hung in the air, and for the first time, Sarah's eyes widened with disbelief. "What? But why would he? How could he?" Before she could finish her sentence, Marcus walked in. His confident, smug smile faltered the moment he saw us sitting there. He could sense something was wrong. His eyes flicked between Sarah and me, calculating the situation in an instant. "You don't need to listen to her, Sarah," Marcus said, his voice sharp and controlling. "She's clearly having another paranoid episode. You know what's best for her. She's just confused." But Sarah didn't respond. Instead, she turned to me, her expression a mixture of concern and guilt. "Mother, is this really true? Has Marcus been lying to me?" For a brief moment, Marcus's face went ashen. It was the crack in his armor I had been waiting for. He could no longer manipulate Sarah. The illusion was over. "This isn't true," Marcus spat, his voice dripping with venom. "She's just trying to turn you against me. I've been trying to protect both of you from the truth, but she's too far gone." I stood, my gaze unwavering. "No, Marcus, the truth is that you've been trying to control everything we have. You wanted my wealth, and you didn't care who you had to hurt to get it. You lied to Sarah, you lied to everyone, and now your lies are catching up with you." The realization hit Sarah like a ton of bricks. She was finally seeing Marcus for who he truly was. A manipulator, a predator who had wormed his way into our family and tried to tear it apart from the inside. "I can't believe this," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I trusted you. I loved you. How could you do this?" Marcus's face twisted with rage, and for a split second, I saw the mask slip completely. He lunged towards me, but before he could get any closer, a team of federal agents burst into the room. They moved quickly, expertly, surrounding Marcus and placing him under arrest. "This is a mistake," Marcus yelled, his voice full of panic. "You don't understand. I'm the one who was helping her. She's crazy." But the agents didn't flinch. "Marcus Patterson, you're under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, elder abuse, and attempted murder," one of them announced, reading him his rights. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." As the agents handcuffed him and began escorting him out of the room, I felt a weight lift from my chest. The nightmare was over. Marcus would never hurt anyone again. His web of lies, his manipulation, his attempts to control our family, it was all coming to an end. The aftermath was just as intense as the confrontation itself. The federal agents continued their investigation, collecting evidence that would ensure Marcus's conviction. But the most important thing was that Sarah was free from his grip, free to heal from the betrayal, and free to rebuild the life that Marcus had nearly destroyed. Sarah and I spent hours talking, piecing together the fragments of the truth that Marcus had so carefully hidden. It was heartbreaking, But it was also a beginning. She had been manipulated, yes, but she was strong, stronger than she had given herself credit for. And together, we were going to rebuild the trust that Marcus had shattered. Months passed, and life slowly began to return to normal. The legal battles were long and complex, but they were nothing compared to the emotional toll that Marcus's manipulation had taken on us. But we were healing, stronger than ever. I had learned a hard lesson through all of this. I had underestimated the depths of Marcus's cruelty, and I had also underestimated my own strength. The years of patience, the lessons Thomas had taught me about pruning the roses, all of it came together in the end. Sometimes you have to cut away the dead growth to allow the healthy parts to flourish. As I walked through the garden one crisp morning, I looked at the roses that had once symbolized patience and care. They were in full bloom, vibrant and strong, just like our family was becoming again. The future was uncertain, but I knew one thing for sure. The Whitmore legacy would survive, and the family bonds Marcus had tried to destroy would only grow stronger. And as I stood there, watching the roses sway in the breeze, I finally felt at peace. We had weathered the storm, and we were going to bloom again, together.